Oh no. Oh, Mads, you are muted at the moment. Thank you. Thank you.
For some reason, there is technical stuff that needs to be adjusted. Often there is a framework of slight technical difficulties when your technologies encounter a vibration coming from an alternate timeline. I am Carlo of the Essassani. We've been working with human beings for a long time, as you are also a kind of ancestral pattern to us. And my unconditional love to you this day, dear Tam.
Thank you so much. And it's a very interesting time for me to connect with you, of course. Over the last at least couple of months, there's a lot of questions that I have in terms of UAP, UFO sightings, technology, and whatnot that I think your understanding may be useful to hear. And if we can get straight into it, if we may, of course, um, there were questions at the beginning of August that I encountered around restoration, and just different levels of restoration that human beings aren't necessarily accessing at the moment. Um, I'm not too sure right now what that potentially does with the UFO and UAP sightings, but is there anything there that you could share with me to begin with?
Yes. There are, let's say, many different patterns operating in human development at the moment. So you could say, if we were to structure it in categories of time, there is a past category feeding in, the past energy feeding into you, which speaks of restoration, which speaks of healing. And there is a future energy coming in to match you in the present moment. That is, as you begin to clear out the past, you move into the future with less obscurity. And this future then can match you where you find yourself. So essentially, it's a type of vibrational upgrade. What has also been revealed through us through many different entities is this idea that the UFOs are essentially very often available for access. There is even, let's say, a super temporal element to them. They are outside of the realm of time and space as such. And so they often seem to hold personal messages for you. Why do they do this? Well, it is because it is your vibrational configuration that is adjusting itself to the signal that the UFO is broadcasting. It's broadcasting on a very, very wide frequency range. And you may sense as you move into this widening, expansive field, as you shed more of your past energy, more of your future trajectories can, so to speak, become activated in your physical and in your experience. So, what you are experiencing is also a type of preparation for sightings, experiences, contacts, communications that you are signing up for.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And just to go into some context with the Greys, of course, Mads and I have had at least a little bit of history uh, with the Greys, and they did mention around the hybridization program that they did stop eventually, um, around how, of course, the entities or the UFOs that the human beings of the last millennia have seen hasn't always been the Greys. It's been partially them, but not always them. And I'd love to hear, if possible, what other sort of entities have human beings actually been in touch with on Earth? Is it a specific type of entity, or is it just a variety of different entities who are interested in the human genome?
It's a very interesting question that you pose here in general. I could then assign your attention to the same fundamental metaphysical aspect. That is what you call the law of attraction, this law of vibration, that where you vibrationally sit, where your consciousness is focused, this is how you meet and interact with the world. That is to say, to answer your question in a circumspect way, you are only capable of communicating with certain entities. There may be other messages translated into you, but let's say that non-humanoid entities have far less interest in the development of the human project. So the creatures that you have been interacting with are often, well, what is known as the seed races, famous among them the Pleiadians, Arcturians, all of whom travel in crafts, also we do, that are far less obtrusive than the noisy helicopter we hear above. That is, you may sense that there are certain UFOs, certain crafts, as you begin to understand what these actually are, feeding into your past, communicating with you in certain alignments of human history where you are aligned with certain species. So the entities you know as the Greys that we are also very connected to, they have been then more active in moving first into the time you know as the post-war era, 1947 and onwards, but then they have been feeding slightly backwards into time, adjusting the time scale, moving in especially into your 1800s and adjusting certain aspects of what you know as your industrial revolution to try to steer human beings into a more sustainable path of existence. That is what is happening now as you approach also the realization of multi-temporal existence, time travel, you could call it, is that you begin to understand that there are certain aspects of yourself, we could say, that are moving back and adjusting time retroactively. You are then actually fading or phasing back into the past, adjusting these aspects into a higher vibration. And so, yes, this is most interesting to certain species in the galaxy that has a very, let's call it historical archivarian interest. Someone who likes to collect data, and indeed human beings are a type of data banks of a collective unfolding of species that have moved into your experience. But as you widen your expanse, you may also sense that more and more species are communicating with you. Also, certain, let us call them darker entities, you have been communicating with throughout your history. We are happy to divulge this information, but you may find that it creeps into something that may sound or seem slightly horrible to you.
It's actually very, very interesting. You mentioned the dark entities, because I don't know if you already know this as well, but part of what I've been looking at this month has been around exorcism too. So-called entities who just take over human body, and then verbally, in a almost like a channeled sense, discuss and display different levels of of somewhat demonic like attitudes. Uh, is that, I'm guessing dark entities as well are, of course, in relation towards human existences, sightings of the UAPs and UFOs too. Is there an uncanny connection there, or would you classify that as something a bit different and something unrelated to that um, topic?
Often it is particularly connected to these mantis beings. They, in particular, often move crafts and bend certain spaces around themselves. They have also been described sometimes as interdimensional pirates. There is this element of the mantis wanting to intrude and regulate on the space of humanity. That is, they have been harvesting partially separation energies, but also cultivating, let's say, a move towards idealism. Well, the thing here is a part of their agenda is to separate human beings from their connection to their mother planet, making them more of an interplanetary traveling species. This will then make the planet available for more insectoid evolutionary developments, which the mantis are interested in. So, for instance, they were very instrumental in developing some of the ideas around monotheism, and they do have a certain concentration in their energy, in particular in the areas known as Egypt, all of the Arabian Peninsula, and also the deserts connected to Israel, Jordan, and the south of Syria. This is an area where their energy is particularly strong in the desert spaces here. And there is ample sightings also in prehistory that have guided and governed this. The thing is, they're also very instrumental, therefore, in supporting power structures. So to make it simple, it's the question of, well, why were the Egyptians so engaged in building temples while there was also many people, the majority of the population, living on what could be described as a subsistence level. We could also say, why is a state like the US engaged in launching space missions while there are people starving in their population? Well, it has to do with these, we could say, mantis agendas, this idea of uplifting what is slightly harsh, cruel, suppressive, but also authoritarian, what moves resources from the soft, the soft mammally emotional substrate of human beings and into these more orchestrated architectonic instincts of power. So you may sense that a lot of enslavement codes, for instance, actually operate in this greater agenda. To them, there is not really any good or evil. It has more to do with allowing human beings who are susceptible to this possession, this influence, to actually, well, move into that trajectory, to become tempted and to move into this dark experience, to learn something from it as a spirit.
Interesting. That's very interesting. With of course, if we look at religious texts of, let's say, Islam or anything else around what they call entities as jinn, and of course, in the Middle East countries, it's heavily populated in well, heavily Muslim countries. So it's very interesting you mentioned about manatees, highly populated in those areas itself, which is very interesting. Um, of course, this begs the question, and this has begged the question of scientists, people who are very much in the scene of UAPs and UFO sightings, is once we understand that we aren't alone, what does that actually do to the society and everyone else? And it also paints the question of, okay, how can we actually connect more with other, or how can the general population connect more with other uh, pieces of consciousness or entities or the grays, etc., a bit more in a public sphere. And of course, I guess your answer may be just increase your level of consciousness to connect. But what do you, what would you, or like, what are you noticing in that part?
We are seeing that human beings are separating into different timelines. You are developing different types of, let's call them organizational structures. You may even notice emerging around this practice of channeling in different people who communicate with these energies. There are also then types of emergent social structures surrounding it. That is, they offer a type of guiding principle that makes sense in how people live their lives and how they implement some of these deeper insights. So, for people who have connected to this, you may sense that there are, let's say, spaces opening up for you that are still peaceful, that still offer for a development, a blossoming of your inner flower. That is, you have a certain realization that is now unstoppable, that's moving forward. Then there is again, let's say, other human beings who have decided to explore more of the standard gray timeline that is moving into levels of unconsciousness where biological code will gradually merge with technology. A realization that is often also a little spooky to people, but is fairly evident, is that, well, human beings seem to also act as operators, as what is sometimes known as Homo faber, the creating humanoid. This monkey that creates technologies and then becomes entrapped by them. And this will indeed merge into a greater and greater fusion of the biological principle of consciousness with the digital electronic principle. So, what you are seeing, or what we are prophesizing, is essentially, let's say that there is a type of more tribal establishment which will move into many thousands, millions of communities establishing themselves around more sustainable ways of being, around closer connectivity. And then the greater humanity will begin to, let's say, hybridize itself, make itself into a more type of cyborg space traveling entity. So there will be this weird type of split in the species between the organic human beings and the more, let's say, digital, almost computerized human beings, or what may not appear to you as human beings anymore. But they will both understand that they are fulfilling different parts of the human development. And so they are connecting again. We, the Essassani, we stem from the biological development. On our timeline, accelerated timeline, we are far more connected to these natural, let's call them elfin realignments of human beings. You yourself may feel that you are also connecting more to these energies.
That's interesting. You note that. Is there a particular a year or timeline year that those events get prophesized at all?
Yes, 2027 is, well, a type of pivotal year in the visible establishment of, let's, what you have called first contact, but we would rather like to call it sustained contact. So this is the idea that, well, these human beings that are reconnecting to the alignments, different energies, they will be guided then by UFOs, by the presence of visitations, by you becoming a more type of, let's say, etheric species. This is your clear emergence into the 5D. Much will transpire in the collective between then and now. And then we sense this more technological development will be gradual, but you will see at approximately the year 2062 that human beings will have moved into a stage where they will have technologically colonized neighboring planets. That is, you will have colonized Mars, and your satellite, the moon, will also have several settlements. Though the oxygenization of these environments and making them sustainable for the growth of organic life is still far away in the future.
Wow, and of course that's going to be. I don't know if I'll be alive to see that, but well, I'm sure there's a lot to do between now and then. Um, just moving a little bit away from our topic of discussion. Of course, there's a star system called a Randall, which is quite interesting to me. Of course, it's the furthest star away from us that currently human beings have sighted. Um, is there anything that you could connect with there that may be helpful for me to know?
We sense a strong red light coming off, emanating from this place. It, if you were to isolate it into a vibration, it would call itself Olu. That's an O, an L, and a U if you prefer. And it's drawing a type of circumference to liken it to something human. this is simply to make it accessible. Let's connect it to this myth of the bird phoenix. You see, this is a type of soaring entity, but what it does is it paints a circumference around your energy field. So what you have been doing, what is a part of the auspicious things that are being heralded here today, is you also connecting to this greater, let's say, alien development of yourself. So you have been inviting in hybrid DNA for much of your life, and now it has become so active that you may sense the appearance of, let's say, certain magical faculties beginning to emerge. But to answer your question, this phoenix-like bird, it is an energy of renewal that comes through to you. And notice it comes from a very, very distant star to assist you. So there is a type of circumference of your, let's say, vast universal expanse that is being achieved by you stepping in also to the awareness of you as a continual cycle of renewal, being that moves through life and rebirth, recalling more and more of it as you go along.
Wow, that's fascinating. And of course, what I mentioned earlier to Mads was, of course, it's very normal for maybe myself or Mads to understand about the UFO sightings. Is there a is there going to be a larger role for channelers in terms of, let's say, the public communicating with other entities, or just getting around the idea that this does actually occur on a very daily basis? Um, will there be a so what I'm trying to say is there going to be a different role for channelers in the years of what you've mentioned around 2062, 2027, um, and so forth, that you can see?
Well, building up to 2027, you may sense that there is also far greater interest in these topics emerging, and that will lead people to the topic. So, for instance, just a friend here who has also always been interested in the UFO phenomenon, but was not aware that the channeling as such existed until, well, a fairly short amount of months before he began communicating in this way himself. That is, you may sense that the channeling itself is to some extent a symptom of more portals opening in your existence. Well, not to us, but to beings that we are also in communication with, that you are in communication with, such as the Arcturians or the Intergalactic Council. Channelers appear more as a type of energy portals. That is, they are people who configure, who have the outline of a human skeleton, but can then let in more of these galactic energies to readjust the energy field. Then there is also the, well, let's say, more subtle adjustment of your energy field by speech. But you may sense, for instance, that other visionary artists, other types of communication inspiration is doing the same thing of preparing human beings intellectually, emotionally, to take in these realities, to become more of galactic citizens. So it's more also that you could expand your idea of what is channeling as such, and then you would realize that the vocal channelers are more exactly like, well, we will use the term oracles. That is, what is interesting with them is that they can give you very specific, very personal advice, whereas you may actually see that our energies or galactic energies are actually affecting and massaging the consciousness of the collective, often through different channels such as visual media or, yes, mass media in general. And so you may sense the emergence of, for instance, more cartoonish realities and the interest in the mass sighting phenomenon as something that's also in two very, very different ways adjusting the collective consciousness into these more expansive, more vivid, more imaginative realities.
Wow, thank you for that. And yes, you're definitely right in how there's different ways to channel, and there's different elements of channeling which just go into the public sphere anyway, which is great. Going back into UFE and UFO work, there were two very specific questions that I had, and one of them was, of course, a lot of very high level people are understanding that UAP UFO sightings are very close to the tectonic plates, or a majority of tectonic plates, uh, the specific line of the tectonic plate. And of course, what they were theorizing is, okay, if, let's say, a UAP entity was wanting to park their UFO, where would they do so? And of course, a tectonic plate would be the case, as it's, well, it's very hard to see. That, and also, of course, there's been a lot of research around people who have had UAP sightings, and then have also somehow received Havana syndrome as well, mainly in, I think, in pilots itself, or others who have been studied to have actually had Havana syndrome in direct proportion to their UAP sighting. Um, Based on those two statements, is there anything else you may add onto that?
Yes. Again, relating this to this deep metaphysical principle, the law of vibration. So, this idea that everything is indeed experientially only accessible within the basic frame line of your basic vibration. Well, what does this mean? This means that the UAPs are far easier to access within these volatile spaces of more lush virgin energy. That is in places where tectonic energies are creating, destroying, or moving across each other. There is a very, very, very ripe feeling of, let's call it potential energy, chaotic energy. Human beings who are in this space are automatically more receptive to seeing, experiencing these UAPs. But notice then that what often happens is that these areas then have, let's say, a lesser degree of otherworldly communication through other channels. So for people who see the UAPs, they may, for instance, be less inclined to seek out these channeling experiences and to speak, for instance, of those British Isles who also form a very magical triangular energy center, a type of sacred space unto itself. You may sense that being far away from any tectonic zones or volcanic activity. What often happens, for instance, is that the sighting of crop circles is immense here. That this space that, well, allows for a lot of mental orchestration, a lot of technological rebirth, that there is a type of, let's say, mental harmony that pierces through this landscape. So something that also very much intrigues, rightfully, the inhabitants of this island, and indeed others fascinated by it, are these ancient landscapes, well, these ancient men, horses that are painted in the hillsides. So this idea that the landscape itself almost then communicates with a more ancient, artful, expressive way of bringing through the otherworldly is a way that you can think of how, well, let's say, these are all aspects of the same phenomenon of revelation, that you are the mystery that you are slowly unraveling personally and as a species.
I think we may need to go into it a little bit more later on, if we can do so. Um, I think, other than, of course, other than the questions that I've had of the other around the other questions around science and anti-gravity, and when perhaps humans may be able to reverse engineer that based on the current equipment that they've had from non-human intelligence. Can you potentially just comment, please, on the anti-gravity propulsion system itself, and how and what humans haven't actually realized about that yet? I think would help me out.
Yes. The essential idea here is that, well, you are exactly annulling natural forces rather than you are using natural forces to propel yourself. So the idea of what you call rocket science, and which, sorry, to many other species is fairly primitive, though it's often addressed as something that's very hard to learn, is the idea that, well, you essentially use the laws of combustion to try to combat the laws of gravity until you exit the gravitational pull of the planetary orbit. But this or this principle is quite different in our propulsion systems, because what goes on is essentially a creation of a type of annulled space. You could say that everything is vibrationally fed by universal energy. What human beings have not really discovered is that what you, for instance, call the ego, these identity creations that you use to interact or interface with the world, is essentially a type of annulment of universal energy flow. And so what it does is it magically harnesses this into a type of concentrated condensate of universal energy. So you can use this principle also spiritually, or let's say technologically. That is, if you begin to place certain annulment configurations within your vessels, you will essentially create a type of, let's call it, um, resistance space. There are certain elements here, among them tungsten, for instance, but also lithium, that may be used then to act as a conduit for a slight current. This current then creating a type of space that separates from the gravitational pull, understanding, as you will realize, that gravity and electromagnetism are essentially different aspects of universal energy. As you do this, you can realize anti-gravity. This technology is more interesting for, let's say, intraplanetary travel, such as moving between continents or moving between spaces on your planet. More what we use for, say, our spacecraft is we create compressed spaces. So this has been explained other places too, but what we do is that we concentrate a point of massive energy. So what you could think of is that we essentially create a very, very dense small black hole in front of our vessel, and then we keep shooting this in front of us, letting the the immense density of that gravitational pull essentially annul for instance, the laws that govern the speeds of light, and thereby, well, shifting or pulling us through massive speeds through a type of vacuum of our own creation. We hope that makes sense and was illuminating to you.
It's very interesting, and of course, I guess throughout history, humans have tried to potentially concentrate energy at a certain point. Um, and what I'm hearing is, of course, to manage anti-gravity, you need, let's say, a pilot, someone who's involved in the spacecraft, to have the ability to potentially concentrate a point so that different parts of the anti-gravity or the electromagnetism work correctly. Did I have that correct in what I'm saying?
You are a smart cookie, we'd like to say, borrowing this wonderful phrase. That is, there is a sweetness also to us in interacting with your curiosity that we would like to thank you for. Notice how intuitive, how much you are channeling these ideas yourself. Yes, there indeed needs to be that. Pointing to, for instance, the fictional universe of Dune, this idea of there being a type of guild of visionaries, almost a type of priestly class of people who navigate the spaceships through folded time and space. Well, this is an idea that well lends itself to the actual reality of it. That is, the pilot is a type of meditative master at the same time. He focuses this energy, but what it is not it is not necessarily through a great feat of concentration. It is rather through a managing of the chaotic space. So what you are discovering, for instance, in your particle accelerators in that place, as CERN, and by having uncovered the Higgs boson, you find that you are able to create very, very, very minute subatomic spaces that actually actually don't hold any matter themselves. And it is through this let's say, acceptance of this emptiness the pilot will have to do. It is a type of strange combination of, well, we could say a very Buddhist mindset combined with someone who's able to pilot a fighter jet that is necessary. Because as soon as the space collapses, the spaceship is brought to a halt. But as soon as the emptiness is attained, that is, you actually created physically, you create it through technology, but then to sustain it, the pilot actually needs to be, let's say, constantly managing that the flow of matter into that space doesn't accumulate. It's not dangerous, it would just simply stop the journey.
So then the accumulation of the black hole would be, in other words, the mastery of that ability to do that itself. Are you suggesting, or let's say when the Anunnaki travel, they have different? Well, what I want to know is, of course, how does the concentration of energy or the black hole get to the place of where you're currently situated? Is that just the result of the concentration of energy, or are there other elements to it that maybe I'm not understanding or need to know?
Yeah, we would say that, well, partially mentioning the Anunnaki, these are a type of a hybrid creation. And so they are indeed a little obstructed in the way that they work. So there is actually, let's say, a certain amount of difficulty for them traveling between major star bodies. But what really informs them is a lot of reptilian DNA, and many of those beings who have created or ascended even further than us, are in no way dependent on spacecraft. So essentially, these beings in their highest form would be able to, if it didn't violate certain agreements, to bend the entire planetary space around them. That is essentially move the solar system where they were, rather than the other way around. That's a way of thinking of it from human consciousness, because it's these 11-dimensional realities are very difficult to boil into categories of space and time.
Interesting. And would you say, well, your you itself are learning from these 11 dimensional beings, or however many dimensions you want to go up to, on a regular basis too? Then I'm wondering, going a little bit away from our topic, is how your learning process works. And I've asked other entities and beings of this quite regularly, but when you are connecting with 11th dimensional beings, how does your thought process, even if it is a thought process, works in general?
Oh, this is interesting. Also, addressing thought processes, because this may be more akin to this type of etheric, intuitive, flowy type of channeling consciousness that you know. See, what often comes through when our friend here or other channelers communicate with our kind is also the presence of counterparts in other people's energy field. And so your counterpart has been announcing itself for quite some time, but it is now the auspicious time to reveal this in the greater configuration that we trust is emerging. So we in and of itself have less forceful mental energy. We are more receptive, but still being more in our movement from the fifth to the sixth dimension. That is, we are still very physical. We are still receiving this in an impulsive kind. But to not keep the suspense any longer, well, this entity, he's called Liam of the Essassani. That is how he presents himself. In our civilization, your counterpart, his responsibility is to configure these grids of interpersonal concentration of energy. So he's a type of, we could say, group therapist would be a way of approaching it. Group manager, a type of grid manager. What he does is he brings people together, then he soothes and aligns their energy, and then we collectively concentrate more of these channeled energies, receiving the inspiration we need to work with. So we will more, having mapped out or fleshed out a certain issue that we would like inspiration for, we will then sit down and your counterpart will be instrumental in sort of delineating how this group will bring in this technological inspiration, as it may be in this case.
So would you suggest then that every human being who interacts with you has a counterpart equivalent?
Yes, well, so again, feeding the law of vibration, that is not everyone, but by far the most human beings who are called at this moment in time to interact with our energies will have this counterpart vibration. Certainly, yes.
Mm. And if you could illuminate us, what would Mads's counterpart be?
Yes, this is I, Carlo, speaking. And well, I speak on behalf of the collective, but I myself am a communication specialist. And that is what I do is I translate and work on these types of things, but I do it in the physical. So I have often presented myself as a materials expert, but the way I work with materials is a type of, let's say, shamanic interaction. It's this space that you are dancing around. It's the quantum space that you are very intrigued by and questioning this day yourself, because what you are finding is that, well, over this more solid stratum of reality, there is a substratum that is very, very receptive to consciousness. And it is indeed by letting consciousness determine this substratum, this quantum space, that you actually manifest, that you reconfigure reality using consciousness. And so it's establishing these bridges between, let's say, subtle verbal conscious energies and these quantum spaces of manifestation. That is, I'm very interested in how can we affect the material world by affecting consciousness. That is my purview. We are connected. We don't know each other personally, but we are professionally connected as we both work in, let us say, the more off species divisions of the excitements that some of our species follow. That is, our organization is very interested in, let's say, curious, expansive communication with foreign energies. You may notice that this is also something that's repeated then in both your human forms as you sit here, intrigued by this strange concept.
Absolutely. And also, of course, to know that there's always some sort of hierarchy in every being who I come in touch with, at least. Um, how would you, if it's appropriate word, but how would you describe the level of hierarchy that goes on in your species?
We have something more like preliminary hierarchies. That is what you are also finding in your movement towards, let's call it enlightenment, is that, well, all human beings are, let's say, identical as spiritual beings, in that you are all, as we are, a part of the universal source, but you are very unique in your expressions of that. And it is through this unique unfolding, through this understanding, that your purpose, your place is actually set, is cultivated. So to us, we don't really have any idea of, let's say, people who aren't suited to govern, striving for power, which seems to be something that often troubles human affairs. We instead, well, tend to organize based on the situation. So any person can usually emerge as a leader in a given situation if it calls for very creative, spontaneous inspiration. We will usually select the more artistic type, such as your counterpart or myself, for instance. Well, simply to get the project going, then we will select more of a, let's say, managerial, someone who has great organizational skills, someone who understands logistics. So we have more of a, let's say, dynamic responsibility. That is also because we are telepathically connected. So we don't have these strange emotional misunderstandings that human beings often have, where they don't really fully quite understand what it is they themselves want and what other people seek in any given interaction.
I've got a lot of other questions around your particular beings, of course, around how the birthing process works, how that's developed. But um, as of now, I don't believe I have any other questions surrounding any other topics that I feel like I'm compelled to speak of. Is there anything else that you may want to bring up or suggest to us today that could help?
Well, these patterns are being unfolded and being activated for you because there is uh, something calling you. So you may sense that you would like to be a bit more active in observing the heavens, looking to the stars yourself, spending a bit also, let's say, auspiciously coming from this outside space, spending a bit more time looking at the stars, also as we believe these dark nights have then moved upon your planetary geographical space, and that the stars are emerging, becoming more vivid and real. You will find then that as you begin to look into this, there will be even more activations waiting for you. There may even be visitations. You could, well, advantageously begin to look for orbs in the sky, for certain phenomena. We are pointing to a date interval here, approaching the 13th of September. This evening of your time, in the interval of 8:20 to 9:34, we sense that it would be an auspicious time for you, that is in the evening, um, to go outside and observe the sky and be aware of how you may feel your emotional states changing as this is happening. This is one aspect. The other is follow your curiosity. The third is realize that even though verbal channeling may not be the place that you are called to, you yourself are a channeler, a holder of great energies. And our energy is very active in your energy field. So certain abduction experiences abduction experiences, certain reconfigurations of your or reactivations of your DNA, both in childhood, you may begin to recall. There is an episode here. You are approximately 5.5 years old. You are dreaming that, well, let's call them men about the size of an apple and a half are walking in through your bedroom door, and they are tickling you, poking you slightly. This is one of such experiences. This is often how children experience these visitations. You may notice then that these star bodies, they are also beginning to configure you. So notice that you are drawn to different stars because you are actually drawn to channeling this energy into your grid. You are becoming quite solid, and you are becoming this leader, this carrier, this Liam figure who indeed allows for other human beings to cultivate their inspiration in collective spaces. This is much of your talent, and this is something that you may want to examine. And yes, we are checking in uh with Tham here. Are you with me, Tham?
The internet went I think like a minute ago, so I didn't hear that part, but I'll watch it in the recording. But yes, I didn't get to say my thanks to your lovely friend. So
Oh,
yes.
I'll jump back. We have time, friends. So no worries.
Okay, thank you.
Because what you may be experiencing here, dear Tam, is that there are certain, again, vibrational readjustments. Notice the muting in the beginning. Notice what we were doing was divulging your spirit purpose here. You aligning with your greater counterparts, with this Liam entity, you coming into this leader quality, but a leader who sometimes is essentially leading by following, someone who is good at channeling energies that are necessary into the collective and reading those spaces in a group and working with it in order to receive and expand. This is much of your spirit purpose, but this is a higher vibration. And as this higher vibration moves in, it will actually also begin to distort some things. So you may find that, and this is simply to, let's say, safeguard you, that, well, certain difficulties may arise in some of your interpersonal relationships, particularly intimate ones, as you adjust to a type of more empowered, more integrated, more directed sense of yourself. You may also sense that certain technical difficulties are connected to this. We know, for instance, earlier this year, there was a type of financial scare, this sense that often you have this on your path of awakening as a human being, this sense that, well, the monetary issue, the feeling of being cut off from resources, is something that will be provoked because it needs to be resolved in everybody in order for you to trust your own power, to know that even if you are cut off, you are capable. You can make up solutions. You are never at a loss for empowerment, so to speak. This is very active with you. And this is why also that you sense our playful energy, our game-like energy is meeting this more draconic activation that you have been working with. So you are expanding yourself into someone who's able to, let's call it, excitedly game different the powers that be and that flow through you. So are there certain games you would like to play? What excites you in moving into this season of your fall? This is a good time to take stock, our friend.
Well, I can't really tell you really. I don't don't think I have a particular game that I like to play. I don't know if that was that has a different meaning to it or not, but yeah, I don't. Of course, soccer and football is a very very big. If you're looking at a sports like game, then yes, that's definitely one area. Um, but yeah, I'd love to hear more about what it is that you're suggesting.
Yes, because what we are pointing to is that, well, games essentially exist to get people excited. That is, if you were to think of the world as a huge game, what you have done is that you, from a spiritual perspective, you have separated yourself into a certain set of restrictions of rules in order to then have a creative, expansive experience, a dynamic experience within that set of rules. This is what happens within all games. It's a simplified structure that allows for greater fun to be had. So notice that you are already playing games, not that you are in any way manipulating, but that you are following excitement, spontaneous impulses in your life. So notice that your appearance is a game. The way that you dress, the way that you carry yourself, the way that you speak, the looks you give others, the words you exchange with them, the open heartfulness that you are so good at extending. Those are essentially all, let's say, game variables within the greater play of you that you are unfolding. So it's becoming, let's say, more conscious of you being able to select how you want to orchestrate yourself, how you want to play the unique game of Tham with the unique rules, how you want to discover how those rules bend and how they are still defined, what belongs to the rules that are, let's say, defined unbreakable because they're very valuable to you, that are principles that you really adhere to, and what are rules that you would perhaps like to play with. Are there things that you've been taught, or ways that you feel that you are holding yourself back, that you could say, well, I think I will experiment with being slightly cheeky within areas where I actually feel very well behaved, or I feel I will actually want to perhaps even restrict myself in an area where I often feel that, oh, here I really have to apply myself or live up to expectations. So it's essentially you are adjusting the knobs, the rules of, of your own vessel here. And that is hopefully to you a playful experience.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you so much for your time and your energy and your space that you give. I'm sure I'll be trying to connect with the so-called being called Liam very soon, and I will let Mads know of anything if anything comes through to me.
Yes, and we will say from this being Liam, we will also transmit his contact symbol. We are very fond of expressing ourselves through these. So you may send that these are two, well, they are essentially three lines approximately at an angle of 77 degrees, slightly tilted, but three lines close to each other, and then two wavy lines across those in the center. And then encasing that, there is a type of inner circle that touches, well, the lines or the extremity of the lines, their endings. And then there is an outer circle that simply encases this inner circles with the lines within it. So three lines and two water waves across those, a circle around it and a circle around that. You can try drawing it, and you may even find that this is something that turns up in your dreams or visionary experiences. This is a way to communicate with them for you to establish a bond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear Tam. The unconditional love of the Essassani, we thank you for the exciting experience, for having expanded our reality, having played this loving game with us. So, with our unconditional love, acceptance, we bless you, we thank you, and we wish you a peaceful and happy time ahead.
Wow.
Hi,
Hello. Good to see you again.
yes, you